This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
So now we're over to Robert Anthony Waters from Ohio Northern University with a paper about British Guiana.
Thank you. This paper comes from kind of two things that I'm working on. I'm working on the international history of Guyana's independence movement. I'm working with a guy from the Czech Republic on Czechoslovakia and Guyana, with a Chilean on Venezuela and Guyana. Later, after Asa finishes his dissertation, we're planning to work on Canada and Guyana. And if there's any German scholar out here that wants to work on Germany and Guyana, hey, talk to me. And the other is about the AFL-CIO during the Cold War and foreign affairs. And I'm co-editor, shameless plug, of a book called America's Cold War Labor Ambassadors, which is going to come out at the end of the year from Palgrave Macmillan. It's really good. For British Guiana itself, 20 years ago, outside, if you weren't Guianese, you probably hadn't heard about the British Guiana operation. Kennedy working to remove the premier of British Guiana, Cheddi Jagan. But in 1994, through a concatenation of circumstances, the United States was embarrassed and decided to release much of the documentation. And since then, there have been numerous books. The most famous is Stephen Rabe's book, which is sort of a plaintiff's brief for Cheddi Jagan. Clem Secharan's book on the sugar industry in Guyana. Colin Palmer's biography of Cheddi Jagan. Now Spencer Mawby's book on the British Empire, and which has a big impact on in the Caribbean. So since it's well covered in many ways, I'm going to look at a few things in the British Guiana independence and Kennedy's involvement that are a little less covered, or that I think have not been covered correctly. When President Kennedy took office, it's pretty clear he planned on doing a Caribbean cleanup. He didn't like what he saw there. Wanted to get rid of Castro in Cuba, wanted to get rid of Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. Was kind of put on hold getting rid of Duvalier in Haiti, whom he thought was going to fall at any moment, but wanted to get Trujillo and Castro gone before that happened. Out of fear they would try and take over Haiti. And at the same time, he tried to shore up the Venezuelan government of Romulo Betancourt, whom a government that was liberal, democratic, Betancourt had many of the values Kennedy had. So in this way, he was going to completely reshape the Caribbean. We now know that he also was planning to do something about British Guiana. British Guiana's premier was Cheddi Jagan, a remarkably handsome, very charismatic East Indian who was probably a communist, certainly a Marxist. His wife, Janet, was an American from Janet Rosenberg from Chicago, whom Cheddi married when he was going to school in the United States. She was certainly a communist, as a young, while in college, had been a member of the Young Communist League. Kennedy was greatly concerned about having a Marxist, probably communist government on the South American mainland. So wanted it removed. In March 1961, a special national intelligence estimate, which is the considered opinion of the entire intelligence community, concluded that after independence, we believe Jagan would gradually move in the direction of Castro's Cuba. They did not think that he was going to move immediately go to Castro, but they believed he was going to move in that direction and gradually get there. And so they had to get rid of him. In August 1961, elections were forthcoming for British Guiana. These elections were going to lead to electing the man, or man, who would be the leader of independent Guyana, which and the British planned to give Guyana its independence by the end of 1962. We don't have documentation as to what the Kennedy's administration planned, but probably it had something to do with trying to help the opposition parties in Guyana to defeat Jagan in the upcoming election. The whole Guyanese effort was forestalled on April 6, 1961. And again, we have almost nothing about this, except for a report that the special group, which was the highest covert operations overseers in the Kennedy administration, involved the head of the CIA, people from state, from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, frequently Bobby. They concluded that because of British request, they would not work to overthrow Cheddi Jagan. At the same time, the British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan and his crew were in town, and clearly they had asked Kennedy not to work against Jagan. They convinced Kennedy to try to work with Jagan to win him over to the western side. They told Kennedy that Jagan was muddle-headed, not Marxist. So this is the situation as we go into August 1961. Although he only carried about 43% of the vote, Jagan wins an overwhelming victory because the districts were just set up in such a way that there was a district election, and they were set up in such a way that he was going to win. And he won quite convincingly. So Kennedy was willing to work with him, and in fact invited him to the White House in October 1961, one of the earlier world leaders to come to see the president. Jagan was, the British were right, he was muddle-headed. He touted this in British Guiana as a money conference. This was going to be where the United States was going to pour money upon Guyana and lift it out of poverty. Jagan said, I need $250 million to get Guyana going, and we expect that the United States will come up with $60 million. Well, the United States, before Jagan went to Washington, they sent an economic mission to British Guiana. They were quite stunned at just how slipshod the whole Guyanese planning had been. Cheddi Jagan never met an economic advisor he wasn't willing to listen to for at least a couple of days. He had meet with him René Dumont, the famous agricultural economist. He had Charles Bettelheim, famous French communist economist. Nicholas Kaldor, the famous Hungarian/English socialist economist. And numerous other lesser-known, generally communist economists come in. And so he had all these nebulous plans and this desire for a ton of money, but the Americans told him, no, we can't give you money for these nebulous goals. You need to have actual plans in place. And furthermore, we don't have 60 million. That's more than we're giving to most of Latin America. We can give you maybe 6. Jagan was shocked, horrified, because he had set himself up in the public eye that he was going to get a lot. Now he was set for failure. So he goes to meet with Kennedy, but one suspects that he believed he could win Kennedy over. His good looks, his charming personality had gotten him far in life, and I suspect he believed that it was going to work again with Kennedy. Before he met with Kennedy, he went on Meet the Press, and there he embarrassed himself. The reporters, who were all anti-communists, repeatedly asked him if he was a communist. He refused to answer. They asked him, what is it about Khrushchev that you consider bad? He couldn't come up with anything. So Kennedy caught the second half of the program and was horrified. And in fact, in White House files, they have NBC sent them over the unprocessed court reporter transcript of the debate that afternoon, or the discussion that afternoon. And it was pretty marked out. And Kennedy said, we're not going, said, forget about any of the money for right now. I'm not going to support anything till I talk to him. The meeting, the night before the meeting, Jagan met with, went to Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s house for reception. And several top people went there to kind of feel him out. Robert Alexander was the leading scholar of Latin American labor. He had worked closely with the Kennedy administration. He was tightly enmeshed with the AFL-CIO. And Robert Alexander reported that, yes, Jagan's a communist, but he's looking to be bought. I say buy. Roger Hilsman, who was in charge of State Department's intelligence and research, came to the opposite conclusion. Hilsman said he wants so much money, you can't buy him. It would be impossible. And even if we jack up the $6 million that we proposed, it's not going to be enough to make him notice. So Hilsman said he's a commie, he's unviable, unpurchasable, so sell. Kennedy met with Jagan. The meeting did not go very well. Jagan again was kind of muddle-headed, was obfuscatory on some of his answers. And Kennedy, in turn, would not be pinned down on any projects for Guyana. So Jagan, after the meeting, repeatedly sought to get back in with President Kennedy. And of course they refused, one meeting per customer. But it got so bad that Kennedy's very close advisor, Kenny O'Donnell, who was the top political advisor, said that Jagan was madder than a wet hen. So Jagan leaves the country very angry at the United States. And the United States did not come through with any sort of money, not even the $6 million that had been proposed. And so for months, October, November, December, into January, no money, nothing coming. And most scholars argue that this meeting, that this first impression that Jagan had on President Kennedy was a flop and cost him and ultimately led to his overthrow. Supporting this is is Venezuela's relationship with British Guiana. And the chronology is quite telling. In October 1961, Kennedy meets with Jagan, disaster. Then in mid-December 1961, Kennedy meets with Betancourt. He goes to Venezuela. That and Colombia are the first two countries that Kennedy, in Latin America, that Kennedy visited. And the meeting with Betancourt was fantastic. They loved each other. It was a great meeting, and it was clear from the press that followed that this meeting had gone very well. The following month, January 1962, Venezuela, which had not talked about it for years, announces that they're going to the United Nations and they're going to ask for 2/3 of Guyana. In 1899, there had been an arbitration panel which had said that the British in British Guiana got to keep a big chunk of territory that Venezuela had disputed. The Venezuelans claimed, with some evidence, that there had been some kind of ranagazoo going on, and that, in fact, they'd been cheated out of this territory. And now suddenly, just a couple of months after meeting, 1 month after meeting with Betancourt, or meeting with Kennedy, Betancourt now wants the territory back. So chronology looks like history right there. And certainly the Guianese believed it. Cheddi Jagan believed Betancourt had been set up to do it by Kennedy. So did his opponent, Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. Burnham, the opposition leader, also believed that Kennedy had told Betancourt to do it. It would have been even more telling had Jagan known that in August, shortly before the election, which he emerged victorious, the American ambassador to Venezuela and the head of the Agency for International Development got together with two leading Venezuelan foreign policy makers. The Venezuelans told them that we had met with Jagan a month before, and they told the Americans that they thought that Jagan was salvageable for democracy. Furthermore, they said that for once America should, instead of, let me find the phrase, that instead of America always jumping on the bandwagon after the driver's been selected, instead America should get out in front and announce that whoever wins the election, because of our anti-colonial history, we will support the Guianese victor. We will give them economic aid. We will give them friendship. Now, Dean Rusk had said, no, we can't do that. But nonetheless, the Venezuelans, in August, were talking about working with Guyana and telling the Americans to work with them. Now it's January, and they're not. So again, the seeming supervening, intervening events seem to be Betancourt meeting with Kennedy, Kennedy's disastrous meeting with Jagan. I think, though, that this is an incorrect interpretation. And I think this primarily from a document that I found on the CIA document release called CREST at the American National Archives. This document says this. It's McCone had just met with the special group. John McCone, head of the CIA, had just met with the special group. And he wrote a document for his file. He always wrote in the third person, and he wrote this. McCone discussed the British Guiana Venezuela boundary problem. He stated the conclusion that to aggravate this issue would probably assist Jagan. Now, the one thing they did not want to do was assist Jagan. The nationalism that the Guianese were feeling, McCone clearly believed would actually help Jagan to stay in power. So it certainly strongly implies the United States was not behind the Venezuelan switch in time. My suspicion is that the thing that changed Kennedy occurred in January. On January 4th, 1962, the United States launched the U.S.S. Oxford. The Oxford was a spy ship. It was a nest of antennas that could pick up any sort of communications that from that time period. And the Oxford was ordered, it was launched on January 4th from Virginia, and it was ordered to go to the Punta del Este conference, which was going to take place January 22nd, 1962. But along the way from Norfolk, Virginia to Punta del Este, it was ordered to sit off the coast of British Guiana early January, or probably mid-January 1962. My suspicion is that this is the moment that the Kennedy administration turned against Jagan. Jagan was good friends with Fidel Castro, called him frequently on the telephone. Jagan was extremely angry at the United States for the slowness of economic aid that was not occurring. My suspicion it was simply the American bureaucracy and its usual high standard of efficiency. And I suspect, I have no evidence, I say it without fear or without evidence, that they overheard some things that Kennedy talked about with Castro, and that Jagan talked about with Castro, and I suspect this is what turned the United States against. The following month, Jagan finally settled upon an economist. He settled upon Nicholas Caldor's socialism, which was of a Cripsian sort. It squeezed the economy, led to the labor unions in British Guiana going on strike, led to violence, and led to Dean Rusk writing a letter to the British saying, we can no longer accept Cheddi Jagan. Arthur Schlesinger said Dean Rusk was freelancing on this, but in fact, the evening before he wrote the letter, Rusk had a secret meeting with Kennedy. Rusk's papers in the State Department archive are a mess. They're impossible to find, so I cannot find the topic of the discussion. But again, the coincidence seems to be pretty good. So I believe that it was this new technology, this new ship, this signals intelligence spy ship, that is what ultimately turned the president against Jagan and ultimately led to Cheddi Jagan's government being removed and the opposition coming to power, taking British Guiana to independence. Thank you.